I found my father's name on a Nazi list, but my grandmother swore he saved Jews in secret. The year is 1944. The air in Europe is thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the chilling echo of distant artillery. For millions, the Second World War was not a distant historical event, but a brutal, relentless present. It was a time of unimaginable loss, of shattered lives and landscapes, a canvas painted in shades of gray and the stark crimson of conflict. We are conditioned to see this era through a lens of overwhelming darkness, a monolithic struggle between absolute good and absolute evil, where the lines between humanity and barbarity were seemingly etched in stone. We speak of battles, of strategies, of the sheer, unyielding force of armies clashing. We recount tales of heroism on the front lines, of immense sacrifice, and of the unimaginable suffering inflicted upon innocent populations. This narrative, while undeniably true, often overshadows another, more delicate thread woven through the fabric of this global conflagration, the persistent, often hidden currents of human kindness that flowed even in the most desolate of circumstances. This is not a story about the grand pronouncements of peace treaties or the strategic victories that turned the tide of war. Instead, we turn our gaze to the quiet moments, the fleeting glances, the whispered words that defied the prevailing hatred and despair. We seek out the instances where the uniform, the ideology, the very act of being an enemy, dissolved in the face of shared humanity. Our journey today takes us to the heart of that conflict, not to the halls of power or the battlefields of legend, but into the hushed corners where ordinary people, stripped bare by war, revealed extraordinary grace. We will explore the paradox of a world engaged in systematic destruction, yet capable of profound acts of empathy. Consider the deeply personal, almost unbelievable story that anchors our exploration. A story that begins with a name discovered on a chilling Nazi list, a name that should have signified condemnation, yet was accompanied by a whispered legacy of secret salvation. This is the testament of a grandchild, grappling with a family history that defied conventional understanding. On one hand, the stark, undeniable reality of the Nazi regime's systematic extermination, a historical fact so horrific it can sometimes feel monolithic. On the other, a grandmother's unwavering assertion, a deeply held belief that her own family member, a man seemingly caught within the machinery of that very regime, was in fact a quiet rescuer of those it sought to destroy. This immediate personal conflict, the chilling evidence versus the intimate, defiant truth, is the crucible from which our narrative emerges. It encapsulates the central tension of our exploration. How can such starkly opposing realities coexist within the same human experience, within the same historical moment? This particular script, I found my father's name on a Nazi list, but my grandmother swore he saved Jews in secret, is born from this profound dichotomy. It is a literary and documentary exploration, a tapestry woven from historical fact and emotional resonance, aiming to illuminate the often unseen acts of compassion that flickered like candles in the deepest night of World War II. Our objective is not to diminish the horrors of war, nor to offer simplistic solutions to complex historical atrocities. Rather, it is to reveal the enduring power of human connection, to demonstrate that even when nations pitted themselves against each other in a violent ideological struggle, individual acts of empathy and forgiveness could, and did, transcend the boundaries of enmity. We aim to inspire, to remind ourselves and our audience that the capacity for goodness is not extinguished by conflict, but can, in fact, emerge most powerfully when tested by the greatest adversity. The narrative will unfold not as a dry historical account, but as an emotional journey. We will navigate the treacherous landscape of war, experiencing its suffocating tension and the gnawing fear that became the daily bread of millions. Yet, at critical junctures, we will pivot, shifting our focus to those unexpected moments when an enemy offered a hand, when a shared glance conveyed understanding, when a life was spared not out of obligation, but out of a sudden, undeniable surge of compassion. These are the echoes of humanity we seek to amplify, the quiet victories of the human spirit over the forces of destruction. This is about uncovering the hidden narratives, the personal testimonies, the letters and memories that speak to a different kind of war, a silent war waged in the hearts of individuals against the dehumanizing logic of conflict. It's about understanding that while history books may focus on the grand sweep of battles and political machinations, the true measure of humanity often lies in the smallest, most personal gestures of kindness, gestures that, though often overshadowed, possess a remarkable power to endure and inspire. Our exploration delves into the psychological underpinnings of such acts, touching upon the scientific and philosophical questions surrounding altruism and ethics in extreme circumstances. We will consider how, in the face of overwhelming pressure to conform to the brutal norms of war, individuals found the strength to act against their perceived self-interest, often at great personal risk, to extend kindness to those designated as enemies. This is not about excusing the actions of those who committed atrocities, but about understanding the complex, often contradictory, nature of human behavior under duress. It is about recognizing that within the same conflict, within the same individuals, the capacity for both profound cruelty and extraordinary kindness can exist. The story of the father's name on a Nazi list, and the grandmother's fervent belief in his secret role as a rescuer, serves as our potent entry point into this intricate moral landscape, a landscape where the stark realities of war are complicated by the enduring, often surprising resilience of the human heart. The weight of a single name on a Nazi registry is immense, a chilling testament to the pervasive, systematic nature of the regime. Yet the grandmother's insistence paints a vivid counter-narrative, one that challenges the monolithic perception of wartime atrocity. This isn't about absolving the perpetrators or sanitizing the past. It's about acknowledging the profound complexity of human agency within oppressive systems. The very existence of such a contradiction, a man listed by the architects of genocide yet secretly aiding their victims, compels us to examine the nuances of individual choice and moral courage when faced with overwhelming systemic evil. It forces us to confront the possibility that within the heart of the beast there could be a pulse of defiance, a hidden act of rebellion that history, in its broad strokes, might overlook. This personal testament, passed down through generations, becomes a powerful lens through which to view the broader spectrum of human behavior during the war, revealing that the lines of allegiance and morality were not always as clearly defined as the uniform suggested. Consider the psychological phenomenon known as bystander apathy, a well-documented tendency for individuals to be less likely to help a victim when other people are present. War, in many respects, amplifies this effect on a grand scale, creating an environment where widespread suffering can paradoxically lead to a numbing of individual responsibility. However, the story of secret rescuers, like the one alluded to by the grandmother, actively subverts this principle. These individuals, often acting in isolation or within small clandestine networks, demonstrate a powerful counterforce to apathy. They chose to see the suffering of those targeted by the regime, to recognize their inherent humanity, and to act despite the immense personal risk. This wasn't a grand public act of defiance, but a quiet, deeply personal commitment to a moral imperative that transcended the prevailing ideology of hate. Their actions suggest a profound internal compass, one that remained calibrated to empathy even when the external world demanded conformity to cruelty. Furthermore, the act of secret rescue adds another layer of complexity. These were not individuals seeking recognition or accolades. Their bravery was often anonymous, their heroism obscured by the very danger they faced. This secrecy was not merely a practical necessity for survival, but perhaps also a reflection of an internal conviction so deep it needed no external validation. It speaks to a form of altruism that is pure in its intent, driven not by a desire for reward or recognition, but by an intrinsic understanding of right and wrong. Think of the immense fortitude required to maintain such a dual existence, outwardly conforming to the expectations of a society steeped in prejudice, while inwardly harboring a profound commitment to protecting those deemed undesirable. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, its capacity to hold on to fundamental values even when surrounded by their antithesis. The grandmother's unwavering assertion, in the face of evidence that might suggest otherwise, also highlights the power of personal testimony and the subjective nature of truth within historical narratives. While historical records provide crucial data, they often fail to capture the full emotional and moral landscape of individual lives. Family lore, passed down through generations, can preserve truths that official documents might miss. This particular narrative, therefore, invites us to consider how we interpret historical events. It encourages a more nuanced understanding, one that acknowledges the possibility of hidden acts of goodness even within the darkest chapters of history. It prompts us to ask, how many other stories of secret compassion lie buried beneath the weight of official records and the sheer scale of wartime atrocities? The father's name on the list is a concrete fact, a piece of the historical puzzle. The grandmother's belief is another, a deeply personal and potent interpretation of that same puzzle, suggesting a different, perhaps more profound truth about the man and the times. Building on this, the very act of a person being listed by the Nazi regime, regardless of their ultimate actions, signifies the pervasiveness of the system and the constant threat it posed. To be on such a list meant being under scrutiny, being marked. The grandmother's account suggests that even within this system of surveillance and control, there were individuals who found ways to operate outside its directives, to carve out spaces of moral autonomy. This resistance was not always overt. It was often subtle, clandestine, and deeply personal. It was the kind of resistance that didn't make headlines, but saved lives, a quiet defiance that whispered of a shared humanity in a world that sought to erase it. This duality, the danger of being marked and the courage to act despite it, forms a critical tension that defines the hidden acts of compassion we explore. The very act of being listed by the Nazi regime, irrespective of one's ultimate actions, signifies the pervasive reach of their control and the constant threat they posed. To have one's name inscribed on such a registry meant being under intense scrutiny, a marked individual within a system designed for identification and elimination. The grandmother's account, however, suggests that even within this oppressive framework of surveillance and control, individuals found avenues to operate beyond its direct mandates, carving out personal spaces of moral autonomy. This form of resistance was not always overt or grand. It was frequently subtle, clandestine, and profoundly personal. It was the type of resistance that did not make headlines but demonstrably saved lives, a quiet defiance that resonated with a shared humanity in a world actively seeking to eradicate it. This duality, the inherent danger of being identified and the courage to act in spite of that peril, forms a critical tension that defines the hidden acts of compassion we are exploring. Furthermore, the clandestine nature of such rescues introduces a significant layer of psychological complexity. These were not individuals seeking public recognition or external validation for their deeds. Their bravery was often anonymous, their heroism obscured by the very peril they courted. This secrecy was not merely a pragmatic necessity for personal survival. It likely stemmed from an internal conviction so deeply ingrained that it required no outward affirmation. It points to a form of altruism that is pure in its intent, driven not by the prospect of reward or acclaim, but by an intrinsic understanding of right and wrong that transcended societal pressures. Imagine the immense fortitude required to maintain such a bifurcated existence, outwardly conforming to the expectations of a society steeped in prejudice, while inwardly nurturing a profound commitment to protecting those deemed undesirable. It stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, its capacity to retain fundamental values even when enveloped by their antithesis. Another crucial layer to consider is the phenomenon of moral licensing and its inverse, moral offsetting, within the context of wartime decision-making. While some might argue that participation in the war effort, even in a non-combat role, could create a psychological justification for subsequent acts of cruelty, I've done my part so a small transgression is permissible. The secret rescuers operated on a different ethical plane. They did not seek to balance negative actions with positive ones. Instead, their positive actions were motivated by an inherent moral imperative that superseded any perceived obligations to the prevailing war machine. Their choices suggest an active engagement with ethical principles that were independent of wartime loyalties or nationalistic fervor. They chose to uphold a universal moral code, even when it directly contradicted the immediate demands of their environment. Consider, for instance, the scenario of a German soldier encountering a hidden Jewish child. The official directive is clear: report and eliminate. Yet, the soldier might see not a Jew, but a terrified, innocent child. This immediate, visceral connection can bypass the learned prejudices and ideological indoctrinations. The grandmother's story suggests that such moments of direct human recognition, however fleeting, could trigger a powerful, empathetic response. This response, if acted upon, represents a profound act of individual agency, a conscious decision to prioritize compassion over obedience. It is in these micro-moments of choice, often unrecorded and unknown, that the true resilience of humanity is revealed. The father's name on a list is a historical marker of the system. The grandmother's narrative is a testament to the human capacity to subvert that system through acts of profound, quiet defiance. This challenges us to look beyond the broad strokes of history and to appreciate the countless, often invisible battles waged for the soul of humanity. Beyond the immediate act of rescue, we must also consider the profound psychological impact on the rescuer themselves. The decision to defy orders and extend compassion in a war zone was not a passive one. It was an active reassertion of personal values against a tide of state-sanctioned violence. This internal struggle often manifested in what might be termed moral resilience, the capacity to maintain one's ethical framework despite extreme adversity. For individuals like the hypothetical father in our narrative, this meant navigating a treacherous internal landscape. Outwardly, they might have performed their duties, or at least appeared to do so, to avoid suspicion. Inwardly, however, they were engaged in a constant, silent negotiation with their conscience, orchestrating acts of clandestine aid that required immense foresight and meticulous planning. Think of the sheer mental fortitude needed to conceal a hidden person, to procure food and supplies without detection, to maintain a facade of normalcy while actively participating in acts of rebellion against the prevailing ideology. This internal resilience, this unwavering commitment to a higher moral code, is a crucial, often overlooked aspect of wartime heroism. Furthermore, the ripple effect of such acts, even when unknown to the wider world, can be significant. The saved individual and their family carried the memory of that kindness, a powerful counterpoint to the pervasive narrative of hate and dehumanization. This memory, passed down through generations, becomes a testament to the enduring power of empathy. It serves as living proof that even in the darkest hours, humanity could prevail. Now consider how this applies when you face difficult choices in your own life, where the easy path might be to conform or to look away. The echoes of these secret acts remind us that individual choices, however small or hidden, possess the power to shape destinies and to keep the flame of hope alive. They demonstrate that true strength often lies not in outward displays of power, but in the quiet courage of conviction. Another vital dimension to explore is the concept of moral imagination, the ability to envision a different reality, a reality where empathy triumphs over animosity. Those who engaged in secret acts of compassion possessed this heightened sense of moral imagination. They could see beyond the imposed enemy classifications and perceive the shared humanity in those targeted for persecution. This was not a cognitive exercise, but an emotional and intuitive leap, a refusal to accept the dehumanizing narratives propagated by the regime. For example, a German nurse tending to a wounded enemy soldier, not just as a biological entity to be patched up, but as a fellow human being experiencing pain and fear, was exercising this moral imagination. She was envisioning a world where the uniform was secondary to the shared vulnerability of being human. This imaginative capacity allowed them to conceive of actions that defied the logic of war, actions rooted in a fundamental belief in the sanctity of life. Consequently, the legacy of these hidden acts extends beyond the immediate wartime context. They offer profound insights into the nature of ethical decision-making under extreme duress. Scientific studies on altruism in conflict zones often highlight the critical role of social bonds and shared identity in fostering helping behaviors. However, the stories we are uncovering delve deeper, suggesting that empathy can transcend even the most rigid boundaries of us versus them. The father who secretly aided Jews despite his potential position within the German system exemplifies this transcendence. His actions weren't necessarily driven by pre-existing friendships or shared cultural backgrounds, but by an innate human capacity to connect with suffering, regardless of the perceived enemy status. This challenges simplistic explanations of altruism and points to a more fundamental, perhaps universal, human drive towards compassion, a drive that can be awakened even in the most unlikely circumstances. The weight of that name on a list is undeniable. But the quiet defiance it represents speaks to a different, more enduring truth about human nature. The grandmother's account, detailing a father's secret acts of salvation amidst the Nazi regime, compels us to examine the phenomenon of moral inversion during wartime. This isn't about excusing perpetrators, but understanding how individuals could actively subvert the prevailing destructive ideology. Consider the internal cognitive dissonance. The daily exposure to propaganda that dehumanized entire populations versus the personal encounters that revealed their shared humanity. The father, by acting compassionately, was not merely disobeying orders. He was fundamentally inverting the moral compass that the regime sought to impose. He chose to align himself with an ethical framework that prioritized life and dignity over state-sanctioned hatred, a profound act of psychological and moral resistance. This internal recalibration, this deliberate defiance of the imposed moral order, is a crucial element in understanding how such acts were possible. Furthermore, the very act of engaging in secret rescues speaks to a sophisticated form of ethical reasoning that often goes unacknowledged in historical accounts dominated by grand narratives of conflict. It wasn't simply an impulsive act of kindness, but a calculated risk that demanded foresight, resourcefulness, and an unwavering commitment to a personal moral code. This involved not just the decision to help, but the practical implementation of that decision, often requiring the careful navigation of a treacherous environment. Think of the logistical challenges: securing false papers, finding safe houses, arranging clandestine transport, all while maintaining a semblance of ordinary life and avoiding the pervasive surveillance of the Gestapo. Such undertakings required a level of strategic thinking and emotional fortitude that went far beyond mere passive dissent. It was an active, ongoing rebellion waged in the shadows, a testament to the ingenuity of the human spirit when driven by a powerful moral imperative. The psychological burden of maintaining such a secret life must also be considered. The constant fear of discovery, the isolation of carrying such a profound secret, and the emotional toll of witnessing suffering while simultaneously working to alleviate it would have been immense. This is where the concept of moral fortitude becomes paramount. These individuals were not immune to fear or doubt. Rather, they possessed the strength to act in spite of them. They developed coping mechanisms, perhaps finding solace in the knowledge that their actions, however dangerous, were fundamentally right. This internal resilience allowed them to persevere, to continue their clandestine work, even when the risks escalated and the war intensified. The grandmother's unwavering belief in her father's actions is a powerful testament to the lasting impact of this moral fortitude, a legacy that transcended the immediate dangers of the war. Conversely, it's vital to differentiate these acts from opportunistic behavior or attempts to gain favor. The inherent secrecy and the potential for severe punishment underscore that these were not acts undertaken for personal gain. Instead, they represent a profound commitment to universal ethical principles that stood in stark opposition to the prevailing ideology. The father, by risking his own safety to aid those targeted by the regime, was not seeking reward or recognition. He was acting out of a deep-seated conviction that all human life possesses inherent value. This selfless dedication, this willingness to put oneself in harm's way for the sake of others, is a defining characteristic of true humanitarianism, even when it operates outside the spotlight of public awareness. The story challenges us to consider how, in our own lives, we respond when faced with difficult ethical choices that carry personal risk. Do we prioritize convenience or conformity, or do we tap into that deeper wellspring of moral courage that allows us to act with integrity, even when it is the harder path? The grandmother's narrative in this context serves as a crucial counterpoint to the vast historical record of atrocities. It highlights the limitations of relying solely on official documentation to understand the full spectrum of human behavior during wartime. While the Nazi lists represent the systematic, documented cruelty of the regime, the whispered stories of secret rescues represent the equally powerful, yet often unrecorded acts of human kindness and defiance. These personal testimonies fill the gaps, offering a more nuanced and complete picture of a complex historical period. They remind us that history is not just made by armies and governments, but by individuals making profound choices in their daily lives, choices that, though hidden, can have an immeasurable impact on the course of human events and the preservation of our shared humanity. The act of secret rescue during the war, particularly within the context of the German regime, often involved a profound understanding of the enemy's operational psychology. Rescuers, like the hypothetical father, had to anticipate the methods of surveillance, the typical interrogation tactics, and the predictable responses of those enforcing the regime's policies. This wasn't merely about hiding individuals. It was a strategic game of cat and mouse, requiring an intimate knowledge of the oppressor's mindset to effectively circumvent their control. Consider the subtle art of misdirection, creating diversions, planting false clues, or cultivating specific rumors to divert attention from actual rescue operations. This required not just courage, but a keen intellect and an almost intuitive grasp of how the oppressive machinery operated. It was a form of passive resistance that leveraged the enemy's own predictable behaviors against them, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of human nature under authoritarian rule. Furthermore, the emotional toll on rescuers extended beyond the immediate fear of discovery. It involved the constant, gnawing burden of witnessing suffering and bearing the responsibility for the lives entrusted to them. This created a unique psychological environment where individuals had to compartmentalize their experiences, separating the horror of the war from the intimate acts of humanity they were undertaking. For instance, a German soldier might spend his day engaged in routine military duties, only to spend his nights facilitating the escape of Jewish families. This duality required an extraordinary level of emotional regulation, a capacity to switch between modes of being without succumbing to the overwhelming despair or guilt that such a stark contrast could engender. The grandmother's unwavering belief suggests that this internal strength, this ability to maintain a moral core amidst moral chaos, was a quality that left an indelible mark on the rescuer's character and their family's memory. Another critical layer is the concept of moral contagion, where acts of kindness, even when clandestine, can inspire others to similar actions. While the rescues were often secret, there might have been small, trusted networks of individuals who were aware of and supported these efforts. This created pockets of resistance, fostering a sense of shared purpose and mutual reinforcement. A single act of defiance, replicated and supported, could gradually chip away at the pervasive climate of fear and complicity. Imagine a situation where one individual, emboldened by the quiet success of another, decides to take a similar risk. These hidden networks, though never officially documented, likely played a crucial role in sustaining these acts of compassion over time. They represent a form of social capital built on trust and shared ethical values, a stark contrast to the state-imposed structures of control. The long-term psychological ramifications for those rescued and their descendants are also profound. The knowledge that one's survival was due in part to the courage of someone who was technically an enemy can create a complex emotional legacy. It challenges simple narratives of victimhood and perpetratorhood, introducing layers of gratitude, confusion, and even a sense of shared humanity across historical divides. The story of the father, discovered on a Nazi list but remembered as a savior, embodies this complexity. For the descendants of those he saved, his memory would be a beacon of hope, a reminder that even within the heart of darkness, light could be found. Now consider how this might influence your own perceptions when encountering individuals from groups historically in conflict. Does the possibility of hidden acts of goodwill change how you view potential adversaries or those with differing backgrounds? Moreover, the very act of being listed by the regime, even if one was actively engaged in rescue, highlights the pervasive nature of suspicion and the constant threat of exposure. Rescuers often operated under the assumption that they could be reported at any moment by anyone. This created an atmosphere of extreme tension, where trust was a rare and precious commodity. The decision to trust another individual, to confide in them about rescue activities, was itself a significant risk. This reliance on a small circle of trusted confidants underscores the importance of human connection and mutual support in the face of overwhelming adversity. It suggests that even in the most isolating of circumstances, the human need for connection and shared purpose can find a way to flourish, creating resilient networks of solidarity that defied the logic of war. The act of moral disengagement is a key psychological mechanism that allows individuals to commit harmful acts without experiencing significant cognitive dissonance or guilt. During wartime, this is often facilitated through processes like euphemistic labeling, e.g., collateral damage instead of civilian deaths, advantageous comparison, e.g., we're not as bad as they are, and dehumanization, e.g., portraying the enemy as subhuman or monstrous. However, the clandestine rescuers we are exploring actively countered these forces. They engaged in moral re-engagement, consciously choosing to see the humanity in their targets, thereby resisting the psychological pressures to dehumanize and detach. This wasn't a passive state, but an active, ongoing effort to maintain their ethical integrity. For example, a German doctor secretly providing medical care to a downed Allied pilot wasn't just performing a medical procedure. They were actively rejecting the regime's propaganda that painted enemy soldiers as less than human, choosing instead to recognize the shared vulnerability and pain of a fellow human being. This conscious act of reaffirming shared humanity served as a powerful antidote to the widespread moral disengagement fostered by the war. Furthermore, the concept of distributed cognition offers a unique lens through which to understand the organizational aspects of these secret rescue operations. While often perceived as isolated acts of individual bravery, many rescues were facilitated by a network of individuals, each contributing specific knowledge or resources. This network, operating largely outside formal structures, functioned as a distributed cognitive system. One person might have access to transportation, another to safe lodging, a third to forged documents, and yet another to intelligence about enemy movements. The success of the rescue depended on the effective coordination and sharing of information within this network. Consider the intricate planning involved in moving individuals across borders. A series of anonymous contacts, each playing a specific role, contributing their unique expertise to a common goal. This collaborative intelligence, shared across disparate individuals, allowed them to overcome the formidable obstacles posed by the wartime security apparatus. It demonstrates how collective intelligence, even when informal and clandestine, can be a potent force against oppressive systems. Building on this, the theory of planned behavior provides insight into the decision-making process of rescuers. This theory suggests that behavioral intentions are influenced by attitudes toward the behavior, subjective norms, what significant others think, and perceived behavioral control, the belief in one's ability to perform the behavior. For a rescuer, their attitude toward helping might be strongly positive, rooted in their personal moral values. Subjective norms could be complex. While the state and many peers might disapprove, a small circle of trusted individuals might offer tacit or explicit support. Crucially, perceived behavioral control would be heavily influenced by their knowledge of the environment, their access to resources, and their assessment of the risks involved. The father, for instance, would have had to believe he could effectively hide and aid individuals, assess the risks of specific actions, and perhaps rely on discreet allies to make such a plan feasible. This theory helps explain why not everyone succumbed to fear. Some individuals possess the necessary combination of positive attitudes, supportive, even if covert social circles, and a belief in their capacity to act. Conversely, the phenomenon of moral residue is also relevant. This refers to the lingering feelings of guilt, shame, or regret that individuals may experience for actions taken or not taken, particularly when they feel they fell short of their own moral standards. Rescuers, even those who acted heroically, might have experienced moral residue related to the limits of what they could achieve. Perhaps they couldn't save everyone, or perhaps they had to make agonizing choices about who to prioritize. The grandmother's insistence on her father's secret acts might, in part, be a way of processing or compensating for any perceived moral residue he might have carried, or for the broader collective guilt associated with the era. It's a way of affirming that, despite the overwhelming context of destruction, their family member actively chose a path of moral integrity, perhaps mitigating any lingering sense of failure or complicity in the face of widespread suffering. This concept adds a layer of emotional depth to the rescuer's story, acknowledging the profound psychological weight that such actions could carry, even when successful. The grandmother's insistence on her father's secret humanitarian acts during the war, despite his potential affiliation with the regime, highlights the critical distinction between systemic participation and individual moral agency. It forces us to consider the nuanced reality that individuals operating within oppressive structures were not necessarily monolithic adherents to the ideology. Instead, they could harbor internal conflicts and even engage in acts of defiance that contradicted their outward roles. This perspective challenges the historical tendency to categorize individuals and groups into simplistic binaries of perpetrator and victim, revealing a far more complex spectrum of human behavior. The father's story, if true, suggests a profound capacity for compartmentalization and a deliberate choice to uphold a personal ethical code that ran counter to the prevailing national narrative. This wasn't about a passive inability to act against the system, but an active, albeit hidden, subversion of its core tenets. Furthermore, the psychological concept of cognitive dissonance plays a crucial role in understanding such dual lives. This refers to the mental discomfort experienced by a person who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, or is confronted by new information that conflicts with existing beliefs. For someone like the father, who might have been outwardly associated with the regime yet secretly aided its targets, the dissonance would have been immense. To resolve this, individuals might alter their beliefs, acquire new information that justifies the contradiction, or reduce the importance of the conflicting elements. In this case, the act of rescue itself likely served to reduce dissonance. By actively helping those targeted, the individual reinforced a belief in their own inherent goodness and the wrongness of the regime's actions, thereby justifying their contradictory behavior. This internal struggle, though invisible to the outside world, was a powerful motivator for their clandestine actions, effectively allowing them to reconcile their outward role with their inner moral compass. Consider the practical implications of maintaining such a dual existence. It required an extraordinary ability to mask one's true intentions and emotions. This often involved developing a heightened sense of situational awareness, constantly assessing potential threats and opportunities. It meant learning to read people, to discern who could be subtly approached for assistance and who posed a danger. This skill in navigating complex social and political landscapes, honed through necessity, is a testament to the adaptive capabilities of individuals under extreme pressure. The father, if indeed engaged in secret rescues, would have been a master of this subtle art of deception, a performer playing a role while nurturing a hidden, compassionate truth. This ability to maintain a convincing facade while acting on deeply held moral convictions is a powerful aspect of human resilience that often goes unrecorded in historical accounts. Moreover, the legacy of such hidden acts underscores the importance of intergenerational memory and the power of personal testimony in shaping historical understanding. While official records may document the actions of regimes and armies, it is often the private stories, the whispered family histories, that reveal the true complexity of human experience during times of conflict. The grandmother's fervent belief, passed down through generations, serves as a vital corrective to a potentially monolithic historical narrative. It prompts us to question official accounts and to seek out the quieter, more personal truths that lie beneath the surface. Now reflect on how family stories or personal anecdotes you've heard might offer a different perspective on major historical events you've learned about. Do these personal narratives add depth and nuance to your understanding, or do they challenge the established versions of history? This engagement with personal testimony is crucial for a more complete and empathetic understanding of the past. The very nature of these clandestine operations also highlights the role of informal social networks and trust. In a society where suspicion was rampant and betrayal could have dire consequences, the ability to identify and connect with like-minded individuals was paramount. These networks, often built on shared values rather than overt organizational structures, provided the essential infrastructure for rescue efforts. Trust was the currency, and its careful exchange enabled the clandestine movement of people and resources. The father, therefore, was likely not acting entirely alone, but was part of a subtle web of individuals who, in their own ways, were resisting the regime's dehumanizing agenda. This underscores that even in the most oppressive environments, the human capacity for solidarity and mutual aid can find ways to emerge, forming quiet bastions of humanity against the tide of barbarity. The act of harboring individuals targeted by the Nazi regime demanded not only immense courage, but also a profound understanding of the psychological dynamics of fear and compliance within occupied territories. Rescuers often had to navigate a complex web of social pressures, where neighbors could be informants, and outward displays of loyalty to the regime were sometimes a matter of survival. This created an environment where trust was a rare and precious commodity, meticulously cultivated and fiercely guarded. Consider the individual who, perhaps outwardly appearing as a loyal citizen, was secretly providing shelter. Their success hinged on their ability to manage multiple social personas, projecting an image of normalcy while actively engaged in perilous defiance. This required a constant, exhausting vigilance, an acute awareness of their surroundings and the subtle cues that might indicate suspicion. The psychological toll of maintaining such a charade, of living with the perpetual threat of exposure, cannot be overstated. It speaks to an extraordinary capacity for emotional resilience and a deep-seated commitment to their chosen moral path, often carried out in profound isolation. Furthermore, the effectiveness of these clandestine operations often relied on a sophisticated understanding of information control and dissemination within the occupied zones. Rescuers couldn't simply hide individuals. They had to manage the flow of information about their whereabouts, ensuring that whispers of their existence didn't reach the wrong ears. This involved employing strategies of misdirection, employing coded language, and establishing trusted channels for communication. Think of the careful orchestration required to move someone from one safe house to another, a process that might involve a series of intermediaries, each with a specific role and limited knowledge, thereby minimizing the impact of any single point of failure. This distributed network of trust and information management mirrors modern principles of secure communication, adapted for a context of extreme danger. It highlights how human ingenuity, even in the face of overwhelming technological and organizational power, can find ways to subvert control through decentralized cooperation and a shared commitment to a common, albeit hidden, goal. The long-term implications for the psychological well-being of both rescuers and the rescued are also a critical area of exploration. For those who provided aid, the act of defiance might have offered a sense of purpose and moral integrity that countered the dehumanizing effects of the war. However, it could also lead to lasting psychological burdens, such as hypervigilance, survivor's guilt, for those who were saved, perhaps questioning why they survived when others didn't, and a profound sense of isolation stemming from the secrets they carried. The grandmother's narrative, by bringing these hidden acts into the light, attempts to alleviate some of that historical isolation, acknowledging the bravery that had long been obscured. Now consider how acts of quiet bravery or sacrifice in your own life, or in the lives of those you know, might have had lasting, unseen impacts, shaping perspectives and resilience for years to come. Moreover, the very act of being listed on a Nazi registry, even for someone secretly engaged in rescue, presents a fascinating paradox. It signifies the individual was known to the regime, potentially under surveillance, yet simultaneously they were actively working against its objectives. This suggests a calculated risk, an understanding that their outward appearance or role might offer a degree of cover, or that their actions, while dangerous, were perceived as a moral imperative that outweighed the personal risk. It's a testament to a complex moral calculus, where the perceived necessity of their actions justified the inherent dangers. Imagine a scenario where a person in a position of minor authority within the regime subtly diverts resources or information, a seemingly small act that, when aggregated with others, could have a significant impact. This highlights that resistance wasn't always about grand gestures. It was often about the persistent, quiet subversion of the system from within, a strategy that demanded both cunning and an unwavering ethical compass. The father's name on that list, therefore, becomes not just a marker of potential threat, but a symbol of a deeply complex and courageous human story. The act of secret rescue during wartime, particularly within the oppressive framework of the Nazi regime, involved a sophisticated understanding of the adversary's operational psychology. Rescuers, much like the hypothetical father figure in our narrative, had to anticipate the methods of surveillance, the typical interrogation tactics, and the predictable responses of those enforcing the regime's policies. This wasn't merely about concealing individuals. It was a strategic game of maneuvering, requiring an intimate knowledge of the oppressor's mindset to effectively circumvent their control. Imagine the subtle art of misdirection, creating diversions, planting false clues, or cultivating specific rumors to divert attention from actual rescue operations. This demanded not just courage, but a keen intellect and an almost intuitive grasp of how the oppressive machinery functioned. It was a form of passive resistance that leveraged the enemy's own predictable behaviors against them, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of human nature under authoritarian rule. Furthermore, the effectiveness of these clandestine operations often relied on a sophisticated understanding of information control and dissemination within occupied territories. Rescuers couldn't simply hide individuals. They had to manage the flow of information about their whereabouts, ensuring that whispers of their existence didn't reach the wrong ears. This involved employing strategies of misdirection, utilizing coded language, and establishing trusted channels for communication. Picture the careful orchestration required to move someone from one safe house to another, a process that might involve a series of intermediaries, each with a specific role and limited knowledge, thereby minimizing the impact of any single point of failure. This distributed network of trust and information management mirrors modern principles of secure communication, adapted for a context of extreme danger. It highlights how human ingenuity, even in the face of overwhelming technological and organizational power, can find ways to subvert control through decentralized cooperation and a shared commitment to a common, albeit hidden, goal. The long-term implications for the psychological well-being of both rescuers and the rescued are also a critical area of exploration. For those who provided aid, the act of defiance might have offered a sense of purpose and moral integrity that countered the dehumanizing effects of the war. However, it could also lead to lasting psychological burdens, such as hypervigilance, survivor's guilt, for those who were saved, perhaps questioning why they survived when others didn't, and a profound sense of isolation stemming from the secrets they carried. The grandmother's narrative, by bringing these hidden acts into the light, attempts to alleviate some of that historical isolation, acknowledging the bravery that had long been obscured. Now consider how acts of quiet bravery or sacrifice in your own life, or in the lives of those you know, might have had lasting unseen impacts, shaping perspectives and resilience for years to come. Moreover, the very act of being listed on a Nazi registry, even for someone secretly engaged in rescue, presents a fascinating paradox. It signifies the individual was known to the regime, potentially under surveillance, yet simultaneously they were actively working against its objectives. This suggests a calculated risk, an understanding that their outward appearance or role might offer a degree of cover, or that their actions, while dangerous, were perceived as a moral imperative that outweighed the personal risk. It's a testament to a complex moral calculus, where the perceived necessity of their actions justified the inherent dangers. Imagine a scenario where a person in a position of minor authority within the regime subtly diverts resources or information, a seemingly small act that, when aggregated with others, could have a significant impact. This highlights that resistance wasn't always about grand gestures. It was often about the persistent, quiet subversion of the system from within, a strategy that demanded both cunning and an unwavering ethical compass. The father's name on that list, therefore, becomes not just a marker of potential threat, but a symbol of a deeply complex and courageous human story. The grandmother's unwavering insistence on her father's secret role as a rescuer, even when confronted with the stark reality of his name appearing on a Nazi list, compels us to delve into the psychological phenomenon of moral inversion. This isn't about condoning the actions of those who perpetuated atrocities, but about understanding how individuals, even those seemingly integrated into oppressive systems, could actively subvert the prevailing destructive ideology. Consider the internal cognitive dissonance, the daily exposure to propaganda that systematically dehumanized entire populations versus the personal encounters that revealed their shared humanity. The father, by choosing to act compassionately, was not merely disobeying orders, he was fundamentally inverting the moral compass that the regime sought to impose upon its populace. He actively chose to align himself with an ethical framework that prioritized life and dignity over state-sanctioned hatred, a profound act of psychological and moral resistance. This internal recalibration, this deliberate defiance of the imposed moral order, is a crucial element in understanding how such acts were possible, revealing a complex interplay between external pressures and internal ethical conviction. The practical execution of such clandestine operations demanded an extraordinary ability to mask true intentions and emotions. This often involved developing a heightened sense of situational awareness, constantly assessing potential threats and opportunities. It meant learning to read people with uncanny accuracy, discerning who could be subtly approached for assistance, and who posed an immediate danger through potential betrayal. This skill in navigating treacherous social and political landscapes, honed through sheer necessity, is a testament to the adaptive capabilities of individuals under extreme pressure. The father, assuming he was indeed engaged in secret rescues, would have been a master of this subtle art of deception, a performer playing a role while nurturing a hidden, compassionate truth. This capacity to maintain a convincing facade while acting on deeply held moral convictions is a powerful, often unrecorded aspect of human resilience. Now reflect on how you might navigate situations where your outward actions might be perceived differently from your inner intentions. How do you manage those perceptions while staying true to your core values? Furthermore, the effectiveness of these clandestine operations frequently hinged on a sophisticated understanding of information control and dissemination within occupied territories. Rescuers couldn't simply hide individuals. They had to meticulously manage the flow of information regarding their whereabouts, ensuring that whispers of their existence didn't reach the wrong ears. This involved employing strategies of misdirection, utilizing coded language, and establishing trusted channels for communication. Picture the careful orchestration required to move someone from one safe house to another, a process that might involve a series of intermediaries, each with a specific role and limited knowledge, thereby minimizing the impact of any single point of failure. This distributed network of trust and information management mirrors modern principles of secure communication, adapted for a context of extreme danger. It highlights how human ingenuity, even in the face of overwhelming technological and organizational power, can find ways to subvert control through decentralized cooperation and a shared commitment to a common, albeit hidden, goal. The psychological impact on those who provided aid, even when successful, often left a lasting imprint. The constant fear of discovery, the isolation of carrying such a profound secret, and the emotional toll of witnessing suffering while simultaneously working to alleviate it, would have been immense. This created a unique psychological environment where individuals had to compartmentalize their experiences, separating the horror of the war from the intimate acts of humanity they were undertaking. For instance, a German doctor might spend their day engaged in routine military duties, only to spend their nights facilitating the escape of Jewish families. This duality required an extraordinary level of emotional regulation, a capacity to switch between modes of being without succumbing to the overwhelming despair or guilt that such a stark contrast could engender. The grandmother's unwavering belief suggests that this internal strength, this ability to maintain a moral core amidst moral chaos, was a quality that left an indelible mark on the rescuers' character and their family's memory, a legacy of quiet heroism. The grandmother's conviction that her father, despite his name appearing on a Nazi registry, secretly aided Jews compels us to explore the concept of moral licensing in reverse, how acts of defiance can embolden individuals to take further risks, creating a positive feedback loop of altruism. This isn't about an individual feeling good about a past deed and thus feeling entitled to a future transgression. Rather, it's about how the successful execution of a dangerous, morally upright act can build confidence and refine the skills necessary for subsequent, even more perilous, acts of compassion. Each successful rescue, each evaded suspicion, would have provided tangible proof of capability and resilience, potentially emboldening the rescuer to undertake even greater challenges. For instance, after successfully hiding a family for a few weeks, the individual might feel more equipped to arrange a longer-term relocation, having learned valuable lessons about logistical planning and risk assessment. This iterative process of action, learning, and increased confidence forms a powerful dynamic that can propel individuals to extraordinary levels of courage and commitment. Building on this, consider the application of situational ethics within the context of wartime resistance. Unlike rigid adherence to predefined moral codes, situational ethics emphasizes that the right course of action can depend heavily on the specific context and the potential consequences. A rescuer operating under constant threat of discovery and severe reprisal would necessarily engage in a fluid, adaptive ethical framework. The decision to help one person might involve a different set of calculations than helping another, or the decision to risk exposure for a small gain versus a significant one This doesn't imply moral relativism in a broad sense, but rather a pragmatic and highly nuanced approach to ethical decision-making in extreme circumstances. The father, for example, might have weighed the immediate risk of alerting neighbors against the long-term benefit of securing a safer passage for a family, making a calculated judgment based on the specific threats and opportunities present at that moment. This adaptability was not a sign of wavering morality, but a crucial survival mechanism that allowed compassion to flourish even within a system designed to extinguish it. Furthermore, the psychological phenomenon of empathic distress can provide insight into the internal experience of rescuers. While often leading to avoidance or withdrawal in overwhelming situations, in some individuals, intense empathic distress can fuel a powerful drive to alleviate the suffering they witness. For the father, witnessing the fear and desperation of those targeted might have triggered a profound empathic distress, an unbearable internal mirroring of their pain. This intense emotional response, rather than paralyzing him, could have served as a potent motivator, compelling him to act decisively to alleviate that suffering, even at great personal cost. This suggests that the capacity for profound empathy, when coupled with the opportunity and the courage to act, can be a powerful force for good, even in the most brutal of environments. Now consider how witnessing suffering in your own life, perhaps through news reports or personal encounters, has influenced your own motivations and actions, or perhaps your inaction. Conversely, the concept of moral decoupling offers a counterpoint, illustrating how individuals might compartmentalize their actions to maintain a sense of self-worth. While we focus on the positive acts of defiance, it's important to acknowledge that many within the system did not engage in such moral inversions. Those who committed atrocities often employed moral decoupling, separating their harmful actions from their sense of self by dehumanizing victims or rationalizing their behavior. The grandmother's story, by highlighting the opposite, the conscious reintegration of moral action into a life lived under duress, serves to emphasize the extraordinary nature of the father's alleged choices. His actions, if true, were not a product of moral decoupling, but a testament to a persistent moral integration, a refusal to allow the external context to fundamentally alter his internal ethical compass. This distinction is crucial for understanding the spectrum of human behavior during the war, from perpetrators to quiet heroes. The legacy of such hidden acts also extends to the realm of historical interpretation and the very nature of evidence. The grandmother's testimony, while powerful, represents a form of anecdotal evidence. It relies on memory, on the transmission of stories, and on a deeply personal interpretation of events. Contrasted with the stark official record of a name on a Nazi list, it highlights the challenge historians face in reconstructing the past. It suggests that official documents, while invaluable, often tell only part of the story, and that the full truth frequently resides in the less tangible, more personal narratives that are passed down through families. This reliance on oral history and personal memory is not a weakness, but a vital complement to archival research, offering emotional depth and individual perspectives that can profoundly enrich our understanding of historical events. Reflecting on this journey through the crucible of war, we've navigated landscapes where the stark realities of conflict often obscured the subtler, yet profoundly impactful currents of human interaction. The chilling evidence of systematic oppression, represented by a name on a list, has been juxtaposed with the enduring power of deeply held personal testimonies, suggesting that the historical record, while essential, is rarely the complete narrative. We've observed how the very architecture of war, designed to enforce division and dehumanization, paradoxically became the stage upon which the resilience of individual conscience was most dramatically revealed. The echoes of these hidden acts resonate not merely as historical footnotes, but as potent affirmations of an intrinsic human capacity that can, under the most extreme duress, transcend imposed boundaries and loyalties. The insights gleaned from these explorations converge, much like tributaries feeding into a larger, more powerful river. We've seen how the intricate dance between outward conformity and inward defiance required a sophisticated navigation of psychological and social landscapes. The ability to maintain a moral compass amidst pervasive fear and systemic pressure speaks to a deep-seated human drive for ethical coherence, a refusal to let external chaos dictate internal values. This journey has illuminated how acts of profound kindness, often operating in the shadows, were not simply spontaneous outbursts, but frequently involved strategic thinking, calculated risks, and a remarkable degree of resourcefulness. These were not passive moments of respite from the conflict, but active engagements with a higher moral imperative, demonstrating that even within the darkest trenches, individuals found ways to share their light. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider the cumulative effect of these rediscovered narratives. They form a mosaic, each piece distinct, yet contributing to a larger, more complex portrait of human behavior during wartime. The persistence of empathy, the quiet subversion of destructive ideologies, and the enduring strength of personal conviction paint a picture that challenges simplistic interpretations of history. The very fabric of our understanding of that era, and indeed of human nature itself, is enriched by these often overlooked threads. The path forward, towards a concluding perspective, is paved with these converging insights, anticipating a broader understanding of humanity's enduring spirit. The narrative we have woven, from the chilling discovery of a name on a list to the whispered legacy of secret salvation, ultimately transcends the specific horrors of the Second World War. It speaks to a fundamental truth about the human condition, a truth that persists regardless of the era or the intensity of conflict. The tapestry of war, though undeniably stained with acts of barbarity, is also interwoven with threads of extraordinary kindness, moments where the shared essence of humanity flickered defiantly against the encroaching darkness. These were not grand pronouncements or strategic maneuvers, but quiet, often perilous acts of empathy that remind us of the inherent dignity that resides within each individual, a dignity that even the most brutal systems struggle to extinguish entirely. We have seen how, even when systems sought to enforce division and dehumanize entire populations, individuals found ways to assert their moral agency. The father's name on a Nazi registry, a symbol of the regime's pervasive control, becomes, through the lens of his grandmother's memory, a testament to a different kind of power, the power of conscience, the quiet rebellion of the heart. These acts of clandestine compassion, born from a profound recognition of shared vulnerability, demonstrate that the boundaries of enmity can be dissolved by the simple, yet revolutionary act of seeing another as fully human. They were not merely exceptions to the rule of war, but powerful indicators of an enduring moral compass, capable of guiding individuals toward acts of profound grace even when surrounded by overwhelming cruelty. The echoes of humanity that we have sought are not merely echoes of the past, they are living testaments to our potential. They remind us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable adversity, the capacity for forgiveness, for solidarity, and for selfless action remains. These stories, though often hidden from the grand narratives of history, offer a powerful counterpoint, a reminder that the human spirit possesses a remarkable resilience, an innate drive to connect and to protect, even when the world around it seems intent on tearing itself apart. The profound courage displayed by those who chose empathy over obedience, who risked everything for the sake of another, offers a timeless lesson that kindness, in its purest form, is an act of enduring strength, a force that survives and ultimately enriches the very conflicts it could not prevent. The true practice begins now in recognizing these echoes within ourselves and in choosing, in our own lives, to amplify that quiet, persistent voice of compassion that has always been and will always be the most enduring testament to our shared humanity.